All right, so get this. We're diving into some pretty interesting stuff today.
Oh, yeah.
Moon landing conspiracy theories.
Ooh.
You know, like all those ideas that make you gotta go, hold on, did that really happen?
Right.
And you guys sent in this really fascinating video. It's in Chinese,
Okay.
and it really kind of digs into all those doubts people have about the Apollo missions.
It's interesting, right?
Silly.
Like how these theories, especially about something as huge as the moon landing, like they still capture people's imaginations, you know?
Absolutely. And let's be totally clear up front, like, we're not here to tell you what to believe or not.
Yeah.
We're just going on this journey together.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to understand, like, why these ideas are so persistent, what they say about, like, our relationship with technology and history, and maybe even, like, how we see authority.
That's a good point. I think that's key. You know, it's not about just blindly accepting or rejecting anything.
Right.
It's about understanding, like, why do people believe this stuff?
Exactly. And this video jumps right in with a point that I feel like a lot of people bring up,
Okay.
this technology gap.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically saying that, like, the leap in tech from the 1960s to today seems almost impossible.
Right.
Like, they literally compare landing on the moon back then to doing it with a gaming console.
It's a funny comparison,
I know.
but I think it really highlights like a genuine sentiment.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying, well, if they could do it with that technology back then, why haven't we seen anything like it since?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they even use the example of that Israeli spacecraft that crashed earlier this year.
Oh, right.
Like, if we're so advanced now, why couldn't they stick the landing in 2023?
That's a good question. You know, and I think a lot of people just assume that technology always moves forward,
Yeah.
but it's not always the case.
Sure.
You have to remember, the 1960s space race was a really specific time. You know, that Cold War rivalry was just fueling massive investment, and there was this singular focus on getting to the moon first.
So you're saying it was like more than just the technology, it was like the whole context.
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
comparing apples to oranges almost.
Exactly, yeah, like the political will, the resources, you know, the global stage, all those factors played a huge role.
Okay, I see that.
Hmm.
But then this video goes on and dives into this French documentary.
Okay,
It's a mockumentary,
okay.
but it claims that Stanley Kubrick,
Oh, wow.
the guy who directed 2001, A Space Odyssey, was actually hired to fake the moon landing.
Interesting. You know, it's fascinating how that mockumentary still gets people talking.
I know.
Even though it's satire. The fact that they have those interviews with real U.S. officials,
Right.
even though we don't know if they were in on the joke or not, it just makes it that much more intriguing.
Totally. Like, were they playing along? Or did they just, like, twist their words to fit the story?
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder.
Yeah, I think that that ambiguity is part of what makes it so appealing.
Hmm.
You know, it just plays on our natural curiosity and our desire to uncover the truth.
And speaking of hidden truth, the video then goes on to, like, pick apart these specific details
Okay.
that are presented in the documentary as evidence of this big hoax. For example, they talk about those Hasselblad cameras
Right.
that the astronauts used, and they say that there's no way those cameras would work
Yeah.
in the crazy temperatures on the moon.
It's a common argument. I've heard that before.
Really?
But I think it misses a really important detail.
Oh.
The cameras that they used were modified specifically for the moon.
Oh, really?
They weren't off-the-shelf Hasselblads.
Huh. So they actually prepped the cameras for space travel?
Yeah.
They didn't just grab them from the store shelf?
Nope.
Interesting.
NASA engineers, you know, they made specific changes to make sure that those cameras could withstand, like, the extreme temperatures and all the other crazy challenges of being on the moon.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But they also bring up these inconsistencies with, like, the lighting and shadows in some of the photos. And they suggest that the whole thing was actually staged,
Right.
like in a studio somewhere.
Well, it's important to remember that being on the moon is completely different than being on Earth.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like the way light works up there.
Totally.
It's completely different. You know, there's no atmosphere.
Right.
You've got that reflective lunar dust.
Yeah.
The angle of the sun. It all creates these unusual lighting effects. That might seem really weird to us here on Earth.
So it's not necessarily evidence that it was fake. It's just different physics at play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What might look like a studio setup could be a totally natural phenomenon on the moon.
Okay, I can see how it would be easy to misinterpret things if you don't consider, like, the whole context.
Yeah.
But I gotta admit, this next part is where the video takes a hilarious turn.
Okay. What is it?
They throw out this idea that maybe the moon landing was real, but it got cut short.
Okay.
because of an alien encounter.
The alien cover-up theory classic.
I know.
It's a classic. It just speaks to, like, how fascinated we are with the unknown.
Yeah.
And the possibility of, life beyond Earth.
It's like, can you imagine if that was true? Talk about a historical rewrite. But for now, let's maybe stick with the more scientific evidence, shall we say.
Sure.
The video claims that the moon rocks,
Right.
the ones brought back by the Apollo missions, are actually no different from rocks that you can find here on Earth.
I've heard that one too.
Really?
That's a pretty common misconception.
But we were just talking about how the conditions on the moon are so different
Right.
and how they leave their mark on those rocks.
Yeah.
Are you saying that they just like made that up?
Well, it's more about taking things out of context.
Okay.
Yes, there are definitely differences between moon rocks and Earth rocks.
Okay.
But they're subtle.
Uh-huh.
You need to have specialized knowledge
Right.
and use sophisticated analysis to actually detect them.
So you can't just like look at it and know.
You can't just eyeball it, no.
So they're basically cherry picking information to fit their narrative.
Kind of, yeah. They're focusing on the fact that the differences aren't immediately obvious.
Right.
Without acknowledging, like, all the scientific data that proves that moon rocks are unique.
It's like they're saying, see, even the rocks are lying to us.
Yeah, it's all about creating this sense of doubt,
Yeah.
of questioning everything we thought we knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for some people that's a really appealing idea.
Especially if you already don't trust the official story.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like finding evidence to confirm what you already suspected.
Exactly. It reinforces those beliefs, and it makes it harder to even consider other explanations.
So they presented all this evidence against the moon landing, but then the video ends on this really ironic note.
What's that?
It mentioned that NASA is now auctioning off the original moon landing footage.
Oh, wow.
It's a strange move, right?
It is interesting.
Some people might see it as a way to like capitalize on all these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And, make some money.
Make a quick buck.
Right? Like they're saying, hey, if you think it's fake, buy the footage and prove it.
Yeah, or maybe it's their way of, like, solidifying the historical record.
Right.
Make it even harder to deny that it happened.
Or maybe they're just clearing out some storage space. Who knows? But it definitely keeps the conversation going, right?
It does. It's a good reminder that even after all these years, the moon landing still fascinates us and intrigues us.
Totally.
And maybe that's, like, the most important takeaway from all of this.
You're saying it's not about finding like the definitive answer.
Right.
It's about embracing the mystery.
Exactly. The moon landing, whether you think it happened or not, is this powerful symbol
Yeah.
of human ambition, ingenuity, and our desire to explore the unknown.
Yeah, it's a story that just keeps capturing our imaginations and sparking debate.
It does.
And maybe that's exactly what it was meant to do.
Maybe so.
Well said.
Yeah.
And speaking of sparking debate, we've only scratched the surface of this whole lunar conspiracy saga.
I know, right?
We still haven't even gotten to some of the more technical arguments, like those inconsistencies in the lighting and the shadows that the video keeps bringing up.
Right.
So,
Yeah, those are tricky.
all right, so let's get into those lighting and shadow inconsistencies that the video keeps talking about.
Okay.
Like, they seem to be using those as their, like, smoking gun proof.
It's a really good example of how when you don't have all the information, you can totally misunderstand things.
Right.
Like how light works on the moon, it's so different from what we're used to here.
Yeah, causing no atmosphere, right?
Exactly. On Earth, our atmosphere scatters the light, so you get those soft shadows.
Yeah.
And that, like, diffused lighting on the moon, though,
Yeah.
there's basically no atmosphere, so the light just travels in straight lines.
Oh, wow.
You end up with these super harsh shadows and, like, really stark contrasts.
So we might think it's like a studio spotlight.
Right.
Could actually just be the sun hitting a rock at a weird angle.
Exactly. And you also have to factor in that lunar dust. It's super reflective.
Okay.
So the shadows can actually appear brighter than you'd expect.
Wow. So basically our Earth-based intuition about light and shadow, like it just doesn't work on the moon.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right.
What looks like a total anomaly to us could actually be totally normal up there.
It's a good reminder that we can't just assume that everything works the same way out in space as it does here.
Exactly. And this applies to way more than just the lighting.
Right.
We have to consider all those unique conditions on the moon,
Yeah.
the tech they had back then, and all that scientific data that backs up the moon landing.
I guess it's easy to just focus on the visuals, like the photos and videos, without really understanding the science behind it.
Yeah, and I think we also have to understand why these conspiracy theories are so popular.
Mm-hmm.
Often they come from this need for a simple explanation.
Okay.
People want to feel like things make sense.
All right.
Especially in a world that can feel really chaotic.
Like, okay, if they faked the moon landing, then anything is possible.
Exactly. It can make people feel like they have some control, even if it's not based on reality.
So how do we change that?
Yeah.
How do we get people to be more critical about what they believe?
I think it starts with curiosity.
Okay.
Instead of just dismissing these theories, we should try to understand them. Like, what are they afraid of? What are they worried about?
Like, why don't they trust the official story?
Yeah, and once we understand that, then we can start to show them the other side.
Right.
Present the scientific evidence in a way that's easy to understand and interesting.
It's not about lecturing.
Right?
It's about having a conversation.
Exactly.
Showing them that it's okay to ask questions and be open-minded.
And remembering that even the most established scientific theories are always changing.
Right.
As we get more evidence, science isn't about being right or wrong. It's about always learning and discovering new things.
So it's not about just blindly accepting what we hear.
Right.
It's about questioning and exploring and digging deeper.
Exactly. And sometimes that digging might lead you to some weird places.
Yeah.
But that's part of what makes learning fun.
Well said. So as we're starting to wrap up our deep dive into these moon landing conspiracy theories, what would you say is like the main thing for our listeners to take away?
I think it's important to recognize how powerful stories are.
Yeah.
They shape what we believe, and they inspire us to explore the unknown. The moon landing, whether you think it's real or not, it still gets people excited and makes them curious.
It does.
And honestly, that's a pretty amazing legacy.
Yeah, it's a story that people are still talking about 50 years later.
I know.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep looking up at the stars.
Absolutely.
Until next time, this has been The Deep Dive. So we were talking about those like lighting and shadow things
Right.
that the video kept bringing up.
Yeah.
Like, they're saying that was the proof.
Yeah, like the smoking gun.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good example of how you can totally misinterpret something when you don't understand the full context. You know, like on Earth, we're used to light working in a certain way, but on the moon, it's completely different.
Right.
Like our atmosphere here scatters the light, so we get those nice soft shadows and that diffuse lighting, you know.
Right.
But on the moon, there's no atmosphere to speak of, so
Right.
the light's just traveling in straight lines.
Right.
So you get these super harsh shadows and like really stark contrasts.
So what we might think is a spotlight in a studio
Right.
is actually just the sun hitting a rock.
Exactly. And then you add in that lunar dust, which is super reflective, and the shadows can actually appear brighter than you'd expect.
Wow. So it's like our Earth eyes just aren't used to seeing light that way.
Exactly. Yeah. What might look like a total anomaly to us could be completely normal on the moon.
So we need to be careful about like using our Earth logic when we're talking about space stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And this applies to way more than just lighting, you know?
Right.
We need to think about all the unique conditions on the moon, what their technology was like back then, and all the scientific data that supports the moon landing.
I guess it's easy to get caught up in the visuals, like
Right.
the photos and videos.
Yeah.
And not really understand like all the complex science behind it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's also important to understand why these conspiracy theories are so popular.
Okay, so why?
Well, often I think they come from this desire for like simple explanations. You know, people want to feel like the world makes sense.
Right.
Especially when things feel really chaotic and uncertain.
Yeah.
It's like if they faked the moon landing, then maybe anything is possible.
Right. Like it makes people feel like they have some control.
Exactly. Even if
Yeah.
it's not based on reality.
So how do we like combat that?
Yeah.
How do we get people to be more critical and discerning about what they believe?
That's $1 million question.
I know.
Well, I think it starts with curiosity.
The
Instead of just shutting down these conspiracy theories,
yeah.
we should try to understand where they're coming from. Like, what's making people so skeptical?
What are they afraid of?
Exactly. And then we can start to present the other side.
Right.
You know, show them the evidence in a way that's easy to understand and interesting.
So it's more about having a conversation.
Exactly.
Not like lecturing at them,
Right.
but like inviting them to explore these ideas and be open-minded.
And it's also important to remember that even the most established scientific theories are always evolving. You know, as new evidence comes to light, science is not about being right or wrong.
Okay.
It's about always learning and discovering new things.
So it's not about just blindly accepting what we hear.
Right.
It's about being willing to question and explore and dig deeper.
Exactly. And sometimes that digging might lead you to some pretty unexpected places.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it fun.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into moon landing conspiracy theories, what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
That's a good question. I think it's important to recognize the power of stories.
Okay.
They shape what we believe, and they inspire us to learn and explore the moon landing, whether you believe it happened or not.
Yeah,
It still captures our imaginations and makes us ask questions.
it really does.
And I think that's a pretty amazing legacy.
Yeah, it's a story that's still unfolding even 50 years later.
That's true.
So to everyone listening, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep looking up at the stars.
Absolutely.
Until next time, this has been The Deep Dive.